Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first AESOP Young Academics webinar, Early Career Phase for Young Planning Researchers. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome everyone, and I thank you for taking time out today to be here, as I believe we are all being challenged these days by numerous difficulties. And yet, despite all of these hardships, we are trying our best to share knowledge and experiences. And this is where lies the importance of this webinar. So whether you are finishing a PhD, planning to do one, looking for new post-PhD opportunities, tired from academia and wondering whether you want to shift to the private sector, looking for a postdoc, but you're hesitating if you want to stay in academia or not, or maybe shift to the private sector, this webinar is definitely for you. So we heard it a lot during our general assemblies, on one-on-one conversations with many of you and with the coordination team members. And because we are also young planning researchers, so we know very well what it's like to be in the early career phase, which is a very challenging period. So if you're struggling, you should know that you are not alone. And this is why we're bringing this discussion to your doorstep. So welcome again. Today, you will hear firsthand from academics and experts with different backgrounds and with diversified experiences, discussing a very common and natural question. So what comes after a PhD? And how actually we can ensure a smooth transition from practice to academia and vice versa. Tips, many tricks, and many advices will be at the heart of our discussion. So please stay connected until the end so we can hear from three speakers that I will introduce in a bit. So before handing over to our speakers, I'll start by introducing myself and maybe agree on some housekeeping for this webinar. So my name is Rozana Darwich. I am an architect, urban planner, and a PhD researcher at the University Paris Sorbonne and the Lebanese University. And I am an elected coordination team young academics member. So some housekeeping in this webinar, I would kindly ask participants to keep on muting themselves as now, so we can hear clearly during the presentation. And we would be very glad if we can see your faces, if it's possible. And in parallel, I should note that after the three speakers' presentations, we will be running a Q&A at the end of the webinar. But please feel free to ask your questions in writing them in the chat. Just pop them in there whenever something crosses your mind, and we will make sure to pass it on to the relevant speaker. At any rate, if you didn't manage to stay with us, or if you missed anything, don't worry, we'll be sending around the webinar recording when it's available. So thank you so much and welcome again to our webinar. I will start by introducing our first speaker. Our speakers, as I said, they come from different backgrounds and they have diversified experiences. And we thank them very much for taking time out also today to be with us. Our first speaker is Professor Alessandro Balducci. Welcome, Professor Balducci. He's a professor of planning and urban policies at Politecnico di Milano. He's a former vice rector of Politecnico di Milano 2010 to 2015 and a former head of the Department of Architecture of Planning. He has been a previous president of AESOP and also of the Italian Society of Urban Planners and the National Center of the Studies of Urban Policies. Besides academia, he also worked with the private sector, with the public sector, where he has served as a deputy mayor for urban planning and agriculture of the city of Milan in 2015-2016. So welcome again, Professor Balducci. We are very happy to have you here today with us. So they actually say that behind every success story is even a better one when we hear the details. So cruising through your resume, we dive into a world of successes, of many professional successes in various environments, from academia to practice, public sector, and academic institutions. So let's start first by knowing more about you, the main milestones of your career, And more importantly, was your professional development career journey planned beforehand? And what you can tell us more about the shift you made from academia to practice, and then vice versa. Was it something foreseen? Was it something planned? Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to this first seminar of the Young Academics. It's really a privilege to do that. So just to add something to what you already said about the steps in my career. So when I have to say that I've been guided by a specific passion in introducing participation and interaction in the world of planning in my country, but also elsewhere. So I was also a town councillor when I was a student of a movement that was a participatory movement. And so from then on, I tried to combine this specific interest in direct democracy and the study of planning, which has been the content of my PhD. My PhD has been done between Milan, Politecnico di Milano, Venice, and UC Berkeley, where I had the privilege of working with Melvin Webber, Peter Ho, and Judith Innes. And then when I finished my PhD, I worked in a research institute and also for public administration. And so this has been interesting because as soon as I got a position at the university, just after a few years of being in practice, I immediately went to AESOP congresses and conferences, and this has been very, very important for me because it has been there that I created my international network, which has been very important. Most of the people that are here belong to this network, so I just want to stress and to underline the fact that this has been very important. A lot of friends like Klaus Kunzmann, Louis Albrecht, Patsy Healy have been very important in the development of my path. And so these are some other information about myself. I have a personal website, which is sandrobalducci.com. So if you are interested, you can also find information there. The microphone.
Yeah, I'm abiding to the rules. So thank you so much, Sandro. Actually, I mean, looking at, like I said, at your resume, we feel very triggered to know and to ask so many questions. And because we look forward as young career planners or at the beginning of our stage to see, I mean, how we can reach this phase. Do we really need to plan ahead? Do we really need to know what should come at some point? Because as we know, success comes from a combination of different factors. There's, of course, the competences and the skills, but there's also the opportunities. There's also the network that can help us. You already mentioned the AESOP network. So if I may start breaking down my questions to a first one, let's just take a step back and maybe explain to our audience what possibilities in general, in your opinion, based on your extensive experience, what the possibilities that early career planning researchers have? Just a simple, basic question.
Okay, so I think it is very country specific, even if there are some general recurrences or rules. From what I see, of course, the number of candidates that get the PhD is much higher than the availability of positions in the academia. That has to be clear. And of course, given this situation, I think that first of all, you have to consider also other possibilities, opportunities like research institutes, professional office, public administration. This is what I did when I got my PhD at the beginning. It is very important for me to be an entrepreneur of yourself, so don't sit around waiting. So this is the reason why the creation of the network in the first phase of the career is very, very important. And so, I mean, all what is relevant for this creation of the network is very important. Of course, it is important to publish nowadays, much more than in the past. And I think that it is not so important just to the number of publication, but it is important the content of the publication and working on the construction of a specific profile that is important. And finally, I think what you can do is to look around in terms of competition for other positions abroad, which is, for example, here and there. Now the AESOP is doing an excellent service in advertising the different positions, but also I think you yourself can do it also browsing around in the different universities, be ready to be able to move, and also participate in the ERC starting grants, national research positions, or even Marie Curie, if you have the desire to position yourself in a good situation in order to start the career.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So building on that, is it like a special recipe we do to plan what we're gonna do next? Because sometimes we jump into the next opportunity immediately, and sometimes we really plan that we really want to stay in academia. So starting with academia, since you already mentioned grants, publications, and so on and so forth. So how would you actually decide if you want to stay in academia?
First of all, I think you have to be to be comfortable and to appreciate the academic environment, which is important. So you have to have a strong interest in research, a strong interest in teaching, in the next in training for the next generation. I think all this is very important, of course, because sometimes you are very good researchers, but you don't like that environment because in every country there is something which is not as you expect that it is. However, I think that must be also specific interest in the city, not only in the environment and in the position, in the city and in society, a passion for the object of planning for us rather than for the position. I think it is very, very important for me. And the exploration of the city and of the urban society is something that you can explore from many different positions within the academia, but also from outside, in the public administration, in the private research institute, and so on and so forth. So I think that the two things must go together. So an interest in the academic environment, but also a specific interest in the object of our work. And also, we must also ask ourselves whether the contribution that we can make can add something to the academic community if we wanted to stay in academia. So not just pursuing your own specific interest, but also trying to understand if your specific interest is somehow matching with what the academic community can offer in that moment, and so if you can complement in a way or add in something new.
Mm-hmm. So we can here see the dual approach of, I mean, a personal passion to the city, to the environment, and also an awareness of what we as the researcher can bring to the entire community, which goes beyond a certain faculty position or a certain job that he needs to do. So thank you so much for these for this differentiation of the different layers, because at some point we also feel that some researchers, they don't really feel connected to the academia, and they would like, they have a passion for the city, but maybe from another perspective. They have a passion to the environment, and they would like to show it or to express it in the private sector. So what do you think are the main differences that exist between, let's say here I'm focusing on research, between academia and the private sector?
So it depends very much on the type of work and position that you do occupy, both in the academia and in the private sector. In principle, the university is freer in terms of the exploration of your the development of your own research interest. While the private sector, we listen to something after that, after me, that the private sector always responds to a specific request, to a specific commission, and so that is quite an important difference. In university research, the time which is dedicated to the problem is not so constrained, while in the private sector, you are constrained by limiting the budget. So if you have to develop a specific project, you have a specific budget, and so you have to respond to that, which is less the case in the university. And research in university can also be applied, and particularly in planning. And in this sense, I think that there is a big difference with the private practice, because if you do something within the university, it should be a kind of cutting edge practice in order to benefit also the private practice. So I think that this is an area of overlapping, sometimes of conflict, but also of cooperation, which is quite interesting. So I think that these are the main and the most important differences that we have to consider, and also the convergences.
Yeah, thank you so much. I look forward to hear what Beatrix will talk about after your presentation, what she will talk about the private sector, because she's actually working nowadays in the private sector. Going back to you, Professor Balducci, so you have clearly differentiated between research here and there, between academia and private. Maybe I would like to jump into opening the parenthesis to talk about the public sector. As we know, you had a previous experience working in, as I mentioned while introducing you, in Milan. So maybe you would like to reflect a bit on that to complement this differentiation of working between academia, private, and if we can add here another layer of public.
Okay. In my position, I was quite old when I started this role as a deputy mayor for urban planning in the city of Milan. So it's not so relevant. So I was at that time the vice rector of Politecnico di Milano, and the municipality lost the deputy mayor for urban planning, municipality of Milan. And so the university, in a way, offered the opportunity of having a planner as vice rector to become. So that is not, doesn't happen.
You can add a couple of words about private, about the public.
No, I mean, it has been important, but it is not something which can respond to your question about the different experiences in the public sector and in the private sector, and how you can switch from one to another. Because this is very different from country to country, from university context to university context. For example, before my PhD and during my PhD, I've been working for a few years for public sector, for the municipality of Milan at the time, and also in a research institute. So I didn't do the internal career within the university. And when I got my PhD in 1988, I had to wait for a period. And so coming back also to your question about how can we plan this, my only plan was that I wanted to wait to give for 3 to 4 years the opportunity of finding a position in the university. And otherwise I could go back to, that was my goal. And otherwise I could go back to the private research and private practice. So, I mean, this is the kind of planning, is a planning which is, you have to have a goal, but at the same time a plan B, because at that time I had already a daughter, and so I had a family. And I had to consider, of course, also the material dimension of this. And so then it went for the positive. And it is not very common that someone comes completely from outside. So at least in my country, but it happens. And so we have to consider that. But another issue is the fact that if you have a significant career in practice, complete career in practice, at a certain point, the university may be interested in calling you, particularly in some countries. For example, some very famous planners like Norman Krumholz or Alan Jacobs have been director of planning offices in San Francisco or in other cities, and then the University of Berkeley called them to teach after a longer career within the public sector. So this is something which is different.
And if you want to focus on the shift that you have just mentioned, how is it perceived in academia if you want to go back to practice and then come back?
Okay, it is very different from country to country, I think. But there are some countries in which this is really well planned. So in Germany, for example, in France, there are positions dedicated to planners that come from practice, which I think is very interesting. In Italy, for example, it is less true, and there are many professionals teaching in the university as contract teachers, but the role is not so central, so they are not really in the faculty. They are just giving temporary courses. So I think that this is an issue that in the future, particularly for planning, and we will listen to the other colleagues that will speak after me, but particularly for planning, I think that this kind of interaction with the practice is really very, very important. And I think that this is something that in the future probably will be relevant also for many countries that now do not use that, because if you have only for a subject like planning, if you have only internal career without any experience in practice that can be brought to the teaching of and to the training of the new planners, I think it is not so good. And so from my perspective, I think that this kind of interaction is very, very important.
Mm-hmm. And is there any certain advices that you can provide, or like you said, of course, several times, definitely these discussions or reflecting on these topics is very country dependent, and yet based on your experience, of course, how do you think one can ensure to have a smooth transition from academia to practice and vice versa?
I mean, the fact that it is country specific is also an opportunity. So it's not only a limit, because it means that you can move from one country to another if you are, particularly in Europe, and this is becoming more and more important. In terms of going inside and outside the academia, so switching from practice to academia, I think that this is how to say, so the quality of what you are doing, and also in a way the visibility of what you are doing in a way. So if you publish about the practical work that you do, which is what I did during the period in which I was waiting for a position, you can also be welcomed into the academia. Of course, if you do only the practical work without publishing, this becomes much more difficult. And the reverse it depends upon the way in which the university is structured, because for example, in Italy, most of the positions within the university are steady positions, and it is not so frequent that from the university they move to the practice, while the contrary is quite more common.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for providing all of these details, talking more about your experience and how do you see, based on your experience on the country where you have worked, and of course you have worked in several other countries as well, reflecting on these questions. So thank you so much again. I think it's better to go to another speaker before opening the floor to the Q&A. But please, participants, feel free to write your questions in the chat. So thank you so much, Professor Balducci. Our second speaker is Dr. Beatrix Haselsberger. Dr. Beatrix is a spatial planner. She did her PhD in Vienna, followed by a 6 years postdoctoral position. She worked in academia overall for over 10 years between Vienna University, Austria, and in Italy. Nowadays, together with her partner, who is actually an ecologist, she is running a spatial research and planning consultancy office. Hence, she is currently working in the private sector, running a private planning office. So with her current work, she seeks to make local and regional planning decisions more objective, inclusive, environmentally sustainable, and what she also calls fair. So welcome, Dr. Beatrix. Thank you so much for making it for today. And we are looking forward to hear your story, your personal storytelling, and how you see more or less what we have previously just discussed with Professor Balducci. So also looking on your resume, it seems we see a PhD, postdoc, and then teaching more so, and then a complete shift to the planning sector, and it appears for me for good. So it's a diversified experience, and you have completely switched it from academia to practice. So the floor is yours. If you can maybe start on elaborating a bit on that, and or maybe taking one step back, where you can just tell us more or walk us through your experience until the moment you got the postdoc and this very important decision, I guess, that you have taken to leave academia and to switch to the private sector. The floor is yours.
Hello, Rozana. Hello, everybody out there. It's, first of all, many, many thanks for the invitation to be here with you today. To be honest, it is a bit strange for me sitting here alone in my office and talking to many people out there virtually. I don't actually know how many you are. So I hope I have some messages for you. I hope I can give you some messages along. I have been asked to speak about what comes after a PhD, tips, tricks, advices. There is something I can do for you, I think, but not exactly what was asked to me. Because the thing is with advices, actually, I'm not such a big fan of good advices, because in my life, I experienced that many people try to give advices to me, which they thought are very good, and which in the end, I thought they do not fit into my life. So what I would like to do with the 15 minutes I have is to share with you what happened in my life when I was a PhD student, shortly before the PhD, what happened afterwards in the postdoc phase, and what happened then in the private sector. Why did I move there? And I will try to elaborate a bit on this. And as I was more or less forced by Rozana to make a PowerPoint presentation, I've done this, and I've called my presentation The Fairy Tale of Good Advices, based on what I was saying before, that people love to give good advices. So you will not hear any good advices from me. What you hear is some insights from my life, and I will tell you what went good, what went wrong, what I've learned for myself, the lessons I have learned within my life or career. Actually, I don't like the word career, but many people use it. So I will now start with the PowerPoint presentation and hope you can see it. Do you see my PowerPoint presentation? No.
Not yet.
Not yet.
We can see your desktop.
Okay. Do you see it now?
Yes.
Yes. Do you see the main slides of the PowerPoint presentation, or the one? So it's just one slide which you see.
We can also see your personal notes.
Okay, so just a moment. I make it this way.
Take your time.
Because
no
the problem is I have two monitors here. No, it's just the other way around.
Hey!
Is it working?
I'm ready.
So just a minute to share. Let's make it this way. Do you see one slide now, or the notes as well?
No notes.
No notes, perfect.
Yeah, but please, if you may allow me, Beatrix, can I please ask participant who just entered the webinar to please mute yourself, because we're hearing background noise. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I will start now with I've given my presentation the title, The Fairy Tale of Good Advices. I will explain you the three phases of my, let's say, from PhD to the position where I am now, which is around 15 years lifespan, with the help of a painting from Rudolf Henneberg. It's an idea which I've been taken or stolen more or less from Ben Davy. Thanks, Ben, for the permission to use this idea and also to adapt it according to my needs. I love this painting so much because what you can see on this painting, you see a nobleman, a knight on a horse, and he is riding and try to find happiness. So the painting is called The Pursuit of Happiness. And this is what we are all looking forward to achieve, actually. And the question is, what are the drivers? So the external forces who drives us, like on the painting you see the dead person, the devil in behind, the forces from outside, which are forcing you in a certain direction, and what you're losing on the way. So on the right corner, you see the good Fortuna, which wanted to make the nobleman aware, be aware when you move further to reach your happiness, which you think is the main goal in your life, you will lose that or that. But the nobleman or the knight decided to move on, to go for his happiness. So this is a bit the background of the picture. And what I would like to do now is having a fairy tale. So once upon a while, when I was a student, a spatial planning student, so this is about my life, and I will tell you a bit of what has happened. I was a PhD student. I was active within the AESOP Young Academic Network and also other associations. I was driven by curiosity. This is why I decided to be at the university, why I wanted to go further on. I was also working part-time in the private sector as well as at the university, and also a kind of awareness. What I was seeking for? I was looking for a certain kind of recognition, so getting my voice heard, and of course the PhD, because I really, really believe that when I have the PhD in hand, this is the solution. So then everybody will wait for me. Then it's not so hard anymore to just get another contract for a couple of months and then, oh, please take me for another year and so on. I was believing that with a PhD in hand, the world says, Trixie, we are waiting for you. So I was ready to accept the pressure of time I had during writing the PhD. You all know what I'm speaking about. It's the pressure of time. You have to deliver within that and that period. You have to do that and that. A lot of material dimensions are going on with it. When you're a student, you have to secure also some financial issues. You have to accept deadlines. They force you also to go to conferences, to present your preliminary research findings. so on and so on. You should start publishing and all these things. You all accept it, you like it because you're curious. At least I was. It's about my life. And I wanted to share and to be part of the community. And there is one thing missing here on the slide, it's the fortuna, and which when I'm thinking back, what have I lost during the PhD phase a bit? It was the own ground truth. It's a bit, you start to live in a sort of ivory tower because your day has 24 hours. It's up to you how you use the time. I was so much into the curiosity and being addicted by research that I forgot about doing just strolling around, going around, just doing silly things with friends or other things. But I was happy. For me, it was okay. So when we move to my next phase, now we are in the time span when I've got my PhD, when I was a postdoc at university. So it's again me on the horse, it's the spatial planner, Trixie. I was driven by research and knowledge. I really wanted to move on, to find something out. I tried to get research grants to improve my citation index. And what was I really looking for? For a long-term position, for a stable position, in the ideal case at university, because for me, this was a wonderful environment. It was perfect as it was. I accepted the rules of the university. So I was happy at that time. So for me, it was fine. I won, for example, a huge research project, a research grant, which let me do research for 3 years completely independently from money and from everything. So I was really free to do this and I enjoyed it a lot. Coming back to the title of my presentation, The Fairy Tale of Good Advices. In this phase, actually, I got 2 good advices. The one was from a very close colleague who told me, your research topic is not actual anymore. You need to move on. So it was in an area where I was actually researching on cross-border cooperation. And it was a phase where people thought borders are not important anymore in a Europe without borders. For me, this was not true. And I continued to research on cross-border cooperation and borders because there were so many open questions for me, so many things I wanted to understand and to move further on. Looking back, it was good that I didn't follow this good advice because only due to this very broad knowledge I gathered in the border studies, and I also managed to write a publication on borders, which is among the most of the journal Planning Theory and Practice. So feeling gave me right. The second advice I received is if you want to have a long-term position at university, you need to build up your CV. You have to do that or that. This is good for your CV problem because if it's not your project, you will fail. So at least I rejected a job offer to go abroad because for me, it was not okay for me personally in my life to really move abroad. And there was an offer to go to the Netherlands, a very secure position. And I asked them, what happens? I'm a woman. And what happens if I get a child? I'm looking forward to have a family in the near future. They told me, mothers are very welcome in our country. And you can have, after you give birth, a 6-week pause. And then we have the perfect environment for your little child, and you can come back for work. This is not what I was looking for when looking at family. So when I go back to the Henneberg picture, it's what I was afraid of losing in academia was time for family. This is my personal opinion. I figured out if I move on in this way, there is not enough time to stay or to build a family, because I postponed from year to year to have a child. And when you're a woman, it's at a certain point you're getting too old. But now I have a child, but at that moment I was just like postponing for a year because there is a research project to be finished, there is a publication which needs to be done, there is this, there is that. Everything was more important. So I have decided together with my partner that this is not what we are looking forward to have in our life. So we decided to make our own private research institute. And we have also changed the position. So now if you look at the painting, I'm not anymore the nobleman, the knight sitting on the horse. I am now, together with my partner, the person in behind, the external force who is controlling the planning work in the field. So we have, for example, a developer who has the profit expectation in mind and who they want to do, and now I really speak from experience, anything so that they can determine the plans, concepts and laws which are on the table for planning. They try to interpret it in the way they need to receive the planning permissions they want to have to build huge sites, planning things. It's so strange what comes to our table. No matter what the environment is saying. So what we are doing now is actually to use the knowledge which I've been gaining at the postdoc phase at university and to translate it to the planning practice. And I'm missing a good advice here as well is after a year or so, when we have established our private institute, I got a call from the university, a call from the directorate, from the rector itself saying, we want you to come back. We give you anything you want. You just need to tell us what are your framework conditions, or how to say, what is your price? You will have in Austria, it's the Laufbahnstelle followed by a professorship, guaranteed, lifetime. And then I was saying, I rejected the job offer. And a lot of people told me, you must accept it. First thing, it comes from the rectorate. Second, it's a once in a life chance. The thing was, we have started to help people on the ground with the problems. And we were in the middle of the work and they were really waiting for us, helping them against development decisions where they have in a small neighborhood where huge development projects from industries and so on are going on. And we are saying, no, we take the knowledge we have and help these people. This is the happiness, when going back to the Henneberg picture, which is the highest goal for us. And it leaves enough time for the family. So now I have a child and I like to have time to have with my little daughter to play and to do other things. This has a very high priority for me. So when I move on with the slides, going back to the question, what comes after a PhD, it's the question I was thinking of, maybe I can give you something along as some bit of a method of how you can find out what is your right way. So I posted you and the spatial planning universe, and I would like to invite you to use the Henneberg picture and to figure out for yourself, where are you in this picture? What is the happiness you're striving for? who is forces you, which are the driving forces, and what do you lose on the way. It takes a lot of time to really figure it out, but try to be honest. It helps you really to find your way. What I think, however, is important is that you should ask yourself the question, what is spatial planning? So it should be the object in the center. And there is a book which I've been editing when I was in the postdoc phase, which is called Encounters in Planning Thought. In this book, you find 16 autobiographical essays from key thinkers in spatial planning, persons you know from literature, who have reflected in this book about why they have entered the planning field, what have they achieved when looking back from today's perspectives, what went wrong, what went good, what would they make differently if they would have the options. So maybe the one or other personal essay or art history could also help you of seeing some possibilities of what you can do. For a short introduction, there is a link there from a YouTube video, which is just a 5-minute video when we brought all the authors together in Vienna. Just a short message about planning, what is important in planning. So a bit of a teaser also for the later book. What is spatial planning? This is also one of the results from this book project, is you should keep this in mind in order that you can find your right place in the planning discipline. It's a scientific study of environmentally sustainable development, important organization and functioning of anthropogenic spaces in order to secure socio-cultural needs. Give it some time to understand. You all know what planning is. You're studying planning, but it's good from time to time to come back to the essences and to really think about it when you're looking forward. What is your way and how to find your way in the planning field? Summarizing what went good, also what have I taken from my post-PhD experiences, is there is no general valid recipe. So this is also why I do not want to give you advice today to say you have to do that if you want to achieve that. Sandro mentioned already it's country specific. It's true. It's also dependent from your own life circumstance, from what you're really looking for. If you like to go out to really work with the people, if you want to speak directly with them, or if you prefer to sit more over the books and to really go into research, also this can be very addicted. It's a matter of personality as well. Do not copy paste. If you just seek for a role model and then make in the sense of, okay, this person has done this, if I do it the same way, I will achieve this as well. Find out your own way. Do not just run after the professional crowd, which turned out very important also for me, because I've never done this. And I think I've made a couple of good achievements also in the planning field. And what was important for me is do it your way and stay true to yourself. Keep idealistic, but open-minded, and have principles. This is actually one of the most important things for me, and fight for them. And the final thing I would like to add now is just the planning field needs you. So please take the time to critically think about what do you want to do? And then you will find a way of how to achieve it, either at the university or the private sector or the public sector. Thank you. So I'm back now.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I can see so many people already reacting in different ways. through different mediums to what you have just presented, Beatrix. Thank you so much for this presentation. We can see clearly and in a very detailed way your own storytelling, your own experience, and more particularly how practice actually shaped your mind and gave you maybe a reason to why you actually want to change to the private sector. And this correlates very well to what Sandro was mentioning at the beginning. It is really getting driven to what you like, to what you think is the best for you, and to what are your personal beliefs and your personal passion for. So in this journey, you told us a bit about yourself, about your personal, even your personal struggles that really are very, very important, because these can be considered as limitation, yet it provides a broad range of innovation at some points, wherever you shifted completely to the private sector. Maybe I would actually, since we already covered more or less the time, maybe I can go through the third presentation, and we will leave some probing questions that I just received until the Q&A. And maybe until that time, we can go more into details. And if anyone would like to ask a question, we will leave it until the Q&A. But thank you so much, Beatrix. We'll get back to you during the Q&A. Some questions, I guess, are directly meant to be asked to you. Thank you so much again. So now that we have covered Beatrix storytelling, it's the time to hear from our third speaker, which is Dr. Christopher Maidment, or Chris. Dr. Christopher Maidment is a lecturer in planning at the University of Reading. He is a chartered member of the Royal Town Planning Institute, and he started his career as a planning officer in an English local government in a municipal planning office. Prior to that, Chris studied his PhD at the University of Sheffield, and at the core of Chris' research interest is actually the understanding between the relationship between normative theories of planning and the practice environment, which suits perfectly the discussion that we're having today and the topic of this webinar. So I'll give you the floor, Chris, and just like the other speakers, we feel just to connect ourselves to the advices that the speaker is providing. It's always great to hear a bit about him or herself. What was your story after you finished your PhD? What was it like? The post-PhD phase, did you plan immediately? What did you want to do afterwards? Was it the next step? Was it planned, or was it something that you did just to pay your bills? And because if I am not mistaken, you didn't want to go into the usual normal post-PhD, which is the postdoctoral phase, just like Beatrix. So was it bills related or passion related?
Sure, thank you. And thanks so much for having me. Yeah, so perhaps taking a slightly different route, and I've got some slides that I'll share in just a moment. But I suppose very much coming from the more junior perspective amongst the panel, I sort of realised in preparation for this actually that tomorrow marks exactly 5 years since I submitted my thesis. So it's an interesting time to be thinking about where I am, kind of thing. So I'll just switch the slides and bring up the first slide, hopefully. So hopefully you can all see that one. And I'm just going straight to the second one. And this, hopefully, there we go. So I just put in some pictures here that kind of tell my, well, almost a little bit of my pre-PhD story, but then also the story that's happened since. And actually, really, I kind of have to start with the very top left-hand corner, which is actually from when I was an undergraduate. And I did undergraduate and postgraduate degrees in planning and a PhD planning, all at the University of Sheffield. But that picture is my desk whilst doing a placement year as a student planner, as an undergraduate. And again, yeah, in thinking about this story of whether I had a planned career or how much of it's actually been about luck or judgment, I would kind of say that's a key moment. I was quite lucky to get that placement, partially because it turned out that nobody else applied for it. And I kind of wondering to this day if there'd actually been competition, whether they'd have given me the job. But actually, that was a year of working in the local authority, doing plan making, and really cementing for me that planning was the thing I wanted to do. And actually coming back from that, I could then relate much more to how the theories and practices link together. And that kind of led on to my PhD. So that second picture is the kind of, is actually taken from the day I submitted my thesis. And so was from that PhD experience. And actually my PhD for me, I kind of reflected who I was as a person. So it's very much around the process of plan making and how that links to the concept of public interest. But I'm also not somebody who is very good at doing one thing for a long period of time. So even whilst doing the PhD, I was jumping about all over the place in terms of doing lots of stuff around teaching and curriculum development and things like that, to the point where it started to annoy my supervisors a bit, and they did actually sit me down and say, you know, you need to step back and concentrate on the PhD. But you know, but that was my way of doing things, and I don't regret that at all. Incidentally, one for Beatrix, who might recognise the picture in the very background of that office picture of the PhD, which is taken from the Vienna get together, which is for me a formative moment. But yeah, so that was very much my PhD experience. And actually that, I suppose, shaped where I went next. So I think this is a matter of luck. On the week after I submitted my PhD, I had an interview for the job that's represented by the second row of photographs. So that was 2 years working in a local municipality, working as a planning policy officer and doing plan making. And in many ways, that job almost resulted from a lack of judgment. So I did look at doing postdoctorate in some ways, but actually was told that I wasn't experienced enough. So I was looking at a time when actually even those applying for postdocs were coming to publications. And I was not so good at getting published during my PhD, too busy doing other things. And so actually the local municipality job was an opportunity for me to still, experience what it was like to be a planner and get involved in that experience of plan making. And actually, I, again, don't regret that job at all. And one of the things I'll come on to a bit later is just the sort of the experience I picked up through that job and how that's contributed to where I am now. But hopefully what the picture shows is the variety of that job. So yeah, it is an office-based job, but you are getting out and talking to people. You are getting down to all the different places around the district. I put the second picture in from the left is just a lunchtime's work, sitting down and saying, we're in this town which really needs a lot of improvement. So actually, if we're just sketching this out, what would those improvements look like? So all sorts of things like that. And again, a job that very much fit with my personality of wanting to be able to do lots and lots of different things as part of a job. So again, I'll say a little bit more in a little while on some of the other questions about how that's then translated into my academic experience. And then the final row of pictures is actually my office for my current job in Reading, which I couldn't resist putting in because I've only been there once in the last 6 months. So it's kind of nice for me to be able to see it as well. But that is from me coming back into academia. So I've been with Reading for just over a year. And prior to that, I did 2 years working at Anglia Ruskin University as well, both as a lecturer in planning. And in my job at Reading, I've just taken on the role of Director of Planning Programmes, which is nowhere near as glamorous as it sounds, I will say. But actually, and that's been my experience of coming back into academia. But I think perhaps we're going to go on to talk a little bit about how that kind of practice experiences then allowed me to get back into academia and use some of those skills in academia. But yeah, really for me, a big question about how much this is luck and how much this is judgment. So I'll certainly share some practical insights, but how much of it would actually be regarded as advice, I'm not sure. But yes, so I think Rozana, you had some questions.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you so much, Chris. Yeah, actually, we can see also your personal perspective based on the different phases after PhD, which, like Beatrix said, it's not common, it's not a secret recipe, it's not something that should be very commonplace to everyone. So if you would like to focus on the skills, because you try to work both in the public and the academia. So from your experience, what would you say are the key skills that somebody working in the municipal government would like to do? Because we know, like planning, many of us are already did either during their PhD or during their master thesis some field work. They were engaged with municipalities or with local authorities and working with them. So what would you say are the key differences compared from being a planning officer to being a planning in academia?
Absolutely. So, so hopefully, yeah. So what I've kind of put on this slide is a list of the things that you get involved in working for a local municipality. And actually, the really key message from this slide for me is just actually how similar skill set it is to working in research, to getting a PhD, to working in academia. So I think there are a couple more on the slide as well. Yes. So particularly coming from, the perspective of getting involved in policy, getting involved in plan making, I was lucky enough to join a municipality at a time when they were literally starting from a blank piece of paper. It's we need a new plan for the next 20 years, and we are starting from scratch. I was also very lucky to join a small team, and again, that's something I'll reflect on a little bit later. But in terms of skills that you actually then need to get involved in that plan making process, I think number one, there is a huge amount of reading. One of the key things about being a planner, I think for me, is recognizing that you are very much the person who brings everything together. So you can't know it all. You are going to have to go out there and ask other people and see what they think. And you are going to have to review a lot of different sources to be able to understand that evidence base. So there is a lot of reading involved, which again, clearly we've all experienced doing our PhDs. I think, again, the communication aspect is absolutely crucial. One of the things about being in municipality is you are writing for a wide range of audiences. So you might be writing for other professional planners. You might be writing for elected politicians who have got to make decisions based on your judgment. You might be writing for the community, in which case you're having to put all that effort into making sure what you're saying is understandable. So there's that whole range of audiences, and you have to be able to adapt your communication skills. And again, so important in terms of doing things like public consultation and being able to engage with those wide groups of people. I think, again, very much like academia, loads of meetings, both internally and externally. So if you don't like meetings, maybe a municipality isn't the place for you. I should say, by the way, this is very much from the UK context. So there probably are some similarities, but this is it is a bit context. There is lots of getting out and about on site. Again, so really important. Just you are making a plan for a place. We really ought to be getting out there and seeing what this place is like, and not just doing it from an office. And again, for me, that is a fundamental aspect, I think, of being a planner, is actually that getting out and about. Lots of stuff around presenting. Again, very similar to what we're doing as PhD students. You have to be able to present what you are doing in a way that you can communicate it to other groups, whether they are councillors, whether they are members of the public who need to be able to comment on what you're doing. And I think, again, sort of boring practical detail, lots of dealing with email inquiries from members of the public and things like that. But I think in totality, for me, is a very, very, very similar skill set between being an academic and researcher and being out in the municipality, getting involved in some of these plan making activities. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, thank you so much. And do you think, in your case, since you went academia, public academia,
Yes.
so could you please reflect a bit on the first transition, which is how academia benefited your experience in the public sector, and then what did you take from the public sector that have shaped again your
sure. So let's just see if we so move on to that next slide, which I think will help think about some of that. So I think in terms of moving from the PhD to the public sector, again, in many ways, I was maybe lucky in that my PhD subject was a very good fit because I'd been doing work on plan making anyway. I think because I had developed that very similar skill set through the PhD, that was helpful, and I could give lots of examples of how I was using those skills in the PhD, which you can then take in an interview and say, look, actually what you're asking for, I'm doing, maybe in different setting. I mean, I think, again, I was a bit lucky in that I had some experience being an undergraduate, but I think for me, it was that enthusiasm and being able to just say, look, I have developed these skills. I am interested in plan making. And then coming back, and I think I've got the next slide probably better reflects this. So let's skip that one for the moment. So this is the sort of coming back. In fact, it's the next one, sorry. So I think there are lots of things about the practice experience that then have helped me in getting the job back in academia. So I think, drawing on all those transferable skills I was just talking about, what you can then add to that is a practical understanding of the system, which actually for UK planning schools is, so I think I'd say it's always been important, and it varies a little bit depending on where you go. So my first job back in academia was in one of what you call it was a Polytechnic university, and arguably they placed more importance on having some of that practice experience and being able to teach what you're practicing. So I could very much draw on that and say, look, I have been out there practicing, I do know the system, I can draw these examples from my practice into my teaching. So very much being able to draw on those real world examples. But I think the other thing about my transition back into academia is I've been able to use some of that practice experience in some of the research work I've since undertaken. And to give you a couple of examples of that, one thing which I was involved in early on was a small piece of work which was interviewing planners about their professional capacity and their actual capacity to make a difference and to stimulate change, particularly in relation to sustainability. And I was well placed to get involved in that because I'd sort of gone there and tried to make some of that change happen myself. So I could come to that with very strong understanding. And similarly, I was very lucky to be asked to get involved in a project on actually sustainable drainage systems, which was actually with a group of engineers, and they were doing work out in Brazil. But what they needed was somebody who understood planning and what they were going to do in relation to saying we need better drainage, but how does that fit into the planning decisions where these things actually happen? So again, I was sort of lucky that I could bring that bring that practice into my research. And then I think the other thing is, and I think Alessandro touched on this as well, is you can write about those experiences. So I think, one of the things I've not gotten much better at is actually publishing things, as you'll probably see, but there are one or two things which are very much based on my experience of practice, which I'd like to publish, and which actually for me, one of the key things was I had to keep a diary. I had to keep a diary to become a chartered member, but it means that for somebody like me whose memory isn't very good, I do have that I can draw on and say, here's some really interesting experiences that maybe are worth relating to practice. And I think bearing in mind that in a lot of the literature, there's not enough about case studies, maybe. It's probably just worth giving a couple of very, very practical hints as well about interviewing. So my interview to go into the municipality was just a couple of people and was perhaps relatively informal. Both of the successful interviews I've had since coming back into academia have been much more panel based. So you have got 4 or 5 people who are all asking you different questions, and you are being expected to give a presentation as well. But again, some of what I was able to do was to draw my practice experience there, and nobody's out to trick you, I think. So I think the experience of coming back into academia was that more formal interviewing process. But yeah, friendly enough. And I think the other thing which I'll just mention is, my publication record is not that great, but one of the things that perhaps helped me get back into academia was that one of my publications is a single author publication. So it's just a tiny tip, but one maybe worth mentioning for anyone thinking about this. I think I've rambled a bit there, but I think that hopefully addresses the question.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Okay.
I was a bit curious to know more about this diary that you have just mentioned.
Oh, sure.
Did you elaborate a bit more on why did you keep it? Why did you write on it? Yeah. How much detail was it? Was it daily, kind of information?
So because you mentioned right at the top that I'm a chartered member of the Royal Town Planning Institute. And in order to get to that point, you have to go through the professional assessment of professional competence. And as part of that, you have to submit a logbook saying, these are the experiences I've gained over usually 2 years. And I had that from my undergraduate placement year, and I also had it for my experience this time round. And so actually you have to keep a pretty comprehensive diary of the activities you're engaging anyway, because you have to show, to become a chartered planner in the UK, you have to show that you are exercising your professional judgment. And so you need these examples that you can then write up into kind of case studies. And so I think I was not always most consistent to this, but I was trying to keep at least a sort of a weekly diary of this is what I've done this week. And actually for me, I'm also somebody who keeps a lot of to-do lists. So actually I've got a set of to-do lists somewhere that are all okay, everything I was having to do on a week-by-week basis. So just keeping those kind of records can be useful to then be able to say, well, actually, yeah, this is worth getting into a bit.
And do you think this is something that you can personally advise other colleagues to do, regardless of its a way to get a short-term member?
I think it's useful. I mean, even now back in my academic job, every now and again, you'll get asked to, so I'm going through a probation process at the moment, for example, because I'm a year into a job. And as part of that, I have to be able to list out everything I've been doing. And again, actually something like that is just really useful for being able to say, look, actually, this is the evidence for what I've been doing. And so that works quite well in both. To be honest, and it's going to be the same if I ever look at getting a promotion, being able to have that diary of evidence to draw back on is going to be useful there as well. So yeah, I think so. Yeah.
An immediate question for our dear former president of AESOP, Ben Davey, probing on the issue of diary. Have you been always honest in your diary? I'm quoting Ben here.
Ooh. Yes, I think so. I think because it's only ever been for my eyes. So I've never felt, and so some of the reflections in there are of, oh, this is a bit rubbish kind of thing. I've got, there's some reflections on actually what is not so great about working in local government, and that does make it into the diary, just some of those feelings about, oh, actually this is really hard to actually get anything done because of your position. So I would say they're fairly honest. And actually, to be honest, as part of our charter membership process, you do have to show some of that evidence of being able to honestly reflect. So yes, I think I've been honest to myself. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. If there's any other thing that you wanted to cover in your presentation that I might have missed, please go ahead.
Sure. I think there's just one. I think there's a couple of cultural things worth saying. So let's just say something about those very quickly. And yeah, I think there's a couple of things worth saying about what it means to work in municipality and why you might want to, why you might not want to do it. There is the aspect of serving the public, which I think is important, and actually that feeling that you are out there making a difference in the world, which I think is a bit more direct maybe if you are working in municipality. It is a relatively unpressured working environment. It is quite, certainly in the UK, it has a reputation for being quite 9 till 5. And it is very much about your own motivation, but there are opportunities to take on responsibility if you want them. I mentioned I was very lucky. I was in a very small team, and actually it meant that because I really wanted them, there were lots of opportunities to take on lots of different things. The negatives, and this is very much compared to being an academic, the conversations are definitely less open. You know, you have to be very careful about what you say to people, because it is an environment where ultimately a lot of the decisions are being made by politicians. So you have to be quite conscious of where you sit in that hierarchy. And actually for me, there were occasional feelings of feeling quite low down the hierarchy. It's quite, in all honesty, there's a lot of feeling of I know more about this than you, but you're more senior, so you're the one who's actually going to go off and do this, which sounds a little bit arrogant, but that's how you end up feeling occasionally. And you do find that there are difficult people to deal with. The other thing is the philosophy, right? So UK municipalities are these days quite focused on process and service delivery. And that's what they exist for. So in some ways, plan making as that kind of visionary activity is quite an odd fit for what the rest of a municipality does. And that's often reflected in the working cultures. So that can be quite difficult. And actually what you find then in that transition is you are going from working in a very hierarchical team, being quite closely supervised, to actually coming back into academia, and you have to be very good at being self-motivated, which I have to say I find extraordinarily difficult sometimes, but you have to be autonomous. And similarly, and so I will say this week we are welcoming back our students. So all of my colleagues have been working incredibly hard. And one of the things you have to be prepared for going from any job like this back into academia is you are going from something with quite clearly defined working hours, so 9 till 5, back into literally you do whatever hours it takes to do the job. And that I think is a real problem with academia, if we're being honest. I think if you want to go into academia, it's something you have to be prepared for, and yeah, you do end up making a lot of sacrifices. So I think it's worth being conscious of that. Unfortunately, that means I'm ending on a really negative note, but I think that means I've said everything I want to at this point. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. At the end of the day, I mean, each presentation, like we said, it really reflects really reflects the speaker's own experience, and this is very personally related, and it relates definitely to everyone's opportunities, everyone's environment, everyone's country, and so on and so forth. So thank you so much for providing us all these insightful reflections and advices also on how to better take the choice between going through a practice in the public sector and or staying in academia. I will now, finishing with you, Chris, thank you so much. I will go back to Sandro. Sandro, would you like to reflect a bit on the pluralities of approaches in the post-PhD phase?
Thank you very much. I appreciated a lot of the presentations of Beatrix and Chris, because Beatrix brought into the personal dimension that, so our life is not just being in the private or in the public sector, being in the university or outside, but it is much more complex. And I think that this is true. And also it is true that we are trying to pursue something that can, for her it was the happiness, but I mean it's a kind of metaphor of the fact that we try to be satisfied and to be loved by other people, to be appreciated by other people. And so all this can bring to many different opportunities in your life. A lot of sliding doors, as she has explained very well. And so I mean that it is very important that we reflect upon how to say, the holistic dimension of our life, in which then we have to make choices in different circumstances, and which is, I think, something that it is just unique. We may find similarities, but your life is unique. So, for example, when I started my PhD, I was already 32, I think, because the PhD didn't exist before 1985 when I started, and so I had a lot of problems because I had already a child, and then I had another two children. So during this period in which you have not a steady position, you have to consider the material dimension of your life, how you can sustain a family. And so I think that is the reason why I underlined it during my answer to Rozana, the fact that you have to have always a plan B, and trying to have a plan B which is not so different in terms of interest and in terms of content from the plan A, that can be the private sector or the public or the university. This is up to you. So this is, I think, is very important. So we have not to hide this dimension. The message of Beatrix, I think, is this dimension is very important. And about the presentation of Chris, I appreciated a lot of all these positive and negative aspects of the experiences. I was hit by the fact that I always kept a diary when I was in my public sector activity, because so it was the reason was that I wanted to enter into the university, and so I wanted to do something that on which I could develop some reflection and publication that on the end happened. But at the same time, I think it's very important because this means that you reflect upon what you are doing. And it is incredibly important that even if of course, this is something which is very common in the academic activity, but it is very important also in the private activity that you do, to be able to continue to reflect critically about what you are doing. Because if you do that, even in the private sector, or in the public sector, I mean in the practice, let's say, that becomes very important in order to test, to probe different ways of performing that kind of activity. And I'm sure that either Beatrix and Chris have had this experience of bringing this important dimension of the academic activity, which is continuing to reflect critically about what you are doing. And for example, when I had this political role as a deputy mayor for urban planning in the city of Milan, I remember that during this period, from time to time, I called a number of colleagues from the private and from the university to discuss about what I was doing in order to improve and to do something better from what because when you are into the fluxes of the actions, and particularly in a big city like Milan, so it is very difficult. It is very easy that you lose the sense of the direction or of other opportunities, and this is a typical academic thing. So to continue to discuss critically about what you are doing. So I mean, I also did this kind of diary, and I think it's very interesting for me to find this same story from Chris. But I think that there is something underneath which is probably common And it is this capacity to keep, after having done a PhD, to keep this relevance of being critical about what you are doing and to reflect, to become a reflective practitioner, to follow the Donald Schoen, either in research and in the professional practice.
Thank you so much, Sandro. Thank you so much for reflecting on this and for the points that you have just raised. I will just now go to the questions that we have collected privately and on the public chat. So our first question from Manal to Beatrix. So she's asking about the preparation of a postdoc more particularly. So you have already mentioned that you've spent almost 6 years in postdoc. So if you can reflect a bit on this period, and she's asking if you can share any tips regarding postdoc preparation. So I don't know if you can remember from 6 years, how was it for you? But if you can just mention some tips, some advices on what's the best way to prepare for a postdoctoral research.
First of all, many thanks for the question. It is actually a very specific question on the postdoc phase. So I think if you're in the phase of thinking that this is the way you want to go, this is absolutely fine. And then I'm happy also to share some more insights. In my case, actually, when I finished my PhD, I already had a 6 years working phase at university behind me. It was very loose contracts, again, half a year contract, half a year not, another year a contract, a year not. So it was very randomly contract. When I finished the PhD, as I mentioned before, I was actually thinking that they were all waiting for me and saying, okay, here you have the job and we're just waiting for you. Now you're already prepared for doing the research, for teaching, for doing everything. You're perfectly fit in our team. This didn't happen actually. So to shorten it a bit, what I did was I tried to create my own job. So this was a tip I got, which was actually a good one. And they told me, if you want to stay, we can offer you the place. We have a lot of desks, computers there, but we do not have the money to pay you. If you want to stay, you need to look for grants. And this is actually what I did. I went actually to survive. I took a lot of student jobs. They were not so well paid, but that doesn't matter at the time, because I took the jobs to keep myself alive for a year, where I elaborated a research project. And this is important. I was looking up funding possibilities, and there I found many of them. My tip here is, it is important to be precise and to figure out one, because every funding program has different rules. And if you want to succeed, they are very competitive. You need to really address one funding program. I've elaborated the research question, a very detailed one, and really did it for a year. So it took me a full year to write a research proposal, which then was evaluated half a year. So the process before I got the research project was quite a long one, but it offered me then a 3 years free period for doing research. And this was fantastic because I got the money, I got everything, but you need to invest before. And at that time, you should not ask, what do you pay for me if I do this research project for you? With this research project in the pocket, I was well received everywhere. They said, oh, just welcome. We have a lot of places. You can have this one, or you can go to this department. So I had the option where I would like to do this, because I had a luggage with the money and the research project. It was a sort of reputation bringing with me. So this is a tip, like, if there is no job for you there and you would like to stay in academia, try to find some funding, but really elaborate on it. The persons evaluating a research project they feel and they see if you're just writing it down very loosely with no idea of what you really would like to do. Be very critical to yourself and ask yourself the right question of what you really would like to know and how you can do it. Next thing is involve yourself actively in the planning field. You need to understand the rules of the game, thank you, of the system and of the actors. Because the planning profession is a huge family. Try to get aware of who is in there, who is acting, how all these networks work. Try to get actively involved in the associations or in the journals. They are happy if you say, okay, can I help you reviewing an article? With reviewing an article, you learn how you can write an article. Nobody's a master. You have to learn publishing, and you should publish, but you have to learn it. And so try to get yourself involved. I've been active within AESOP. I've been active within the RSI. I've been at many different journals on the board. I have been a journal editor. So you grow over the time, but start from the bottom and try to learn. And try to speak with other people in a very, very open way. Ask them for opinion, share your ideas, ask them what they think about. So this is some of the tips which helped me actually.
Yeah, thank you so much, Beatrix. I hope, Manal, that we have covered what you meant in your question. Please feel free to ask again in case you need additional information. Staying in the postdoc specific questions, we have another question from Pinar asking also about postdoc, but she's asking, some of us are stuck as postdoc for many, many years after finishing the PhD, which is, I guess, it was your case. So she's saying we gain great skills in publishing and teaching, but we become sometimes too detached from practice. Any advice how we can catch up when it is kind of too late?
Actually, it's never too late to change something or to learn something about the planning practice. So this is important. I agree that in the postdoc phase, you continue, the longer you stay there, this was in my case, the more you gain stay a bit in the ivory tower. You continue reading, researching. You get addicted. It's a feeling of being addicted, and you dive into it, and it becomes more great. You find out something new, and you start to fly somewhere else. And you sometimes really lose the moment how you can translate it to the planning practice. There are huge debates in the research about combining whether how knowledge can fly or be translated from the planning theory to the planning practice. There are huge discussions. What is more important, the theory or the practice? So there is a lot of discussions going on in this direction. Actually, both is important. The theory, what I see now, is very important to be implemented in the planning practice. But you need also to understand the rules of the game in the planning practice. And this was for me very, very difficult in the beginning, because I arrived from the university, having a long experience of working at the university in many different fields, and then landing in the planning practice with an own office. And I was thinking, I know everything about planning. And this was not true, because planning on the territory has different rules, and you need to understand how it works, that you can help people. You need to understand how decisions are made. And you can learn this. You can learn this also from a perspective at the university. You can stay in academia and try to research about how planning is made in the territory. You just need to shift your perspective. It's not easy. Even I had my difficulties in doing it, but you can do it also in academia. You can research on how you can transfer the research knowledge to the people. But it applies that you do a lot of participant observation, speak with them, which is a bit difficult in Corona times. But you need to go to the people, you need to speak with them, you need to understand what they really need. Otherwise, the theories and all you made at university is just for to store somewhere in a book behind, and nobody will read it. Because this is one thing, the people living in the places are, most of them, not interested in reading scientific articles or books, and they do not do. And also a lot of local planners I came across, some of them have also been my students, they think they can do anything they want. And the law, they interpret the law as they like. But this is not the right way. This is not how planning should be. So yes, go and try to understand the planning practice also in the academia. Try it, make it, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Beatrix. I guess Chris would like to reflect a bit on this link of what you just mentioned between theory and practice. So Chris, I give you the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, mostly I'd really just endorse what Beatrix said, and having gone through that experience of practice as a planner, for me, both doing it as part of undergraduate degree and doing it post-PhD, I just found that I understood so much better how that theory was actually being operationalized. So when we talk about public participation, fine, we've got all the theory, but what does it actually mean to go out and talk to a local member of the community, where actually what they really care about is the traffic going through the town, and it's the things like that which you won't necessarily get until you've gone out and experienced that. And similarly, same with working with elected members. And working with elected politicians, until you sort of realize what scope of advice they can give. I think as well, you realize just how those constraints actually operationalize. So, and the extent to which people around you are feeling limited. And I think that really helped me in my PhD as well, because actually I was interested in the concept of the public interest and how that had a practical impact. But you sort of realize from any practice experience that practitioners don't sit around in groups talking about what the public interest means. So you immediately realize that to get into that, you're going to have to ask much more creative things to get into those subjects. So I think, I mean, I'm saying this as somebody who kind of almost swerved around the postdoctoral thing and didn't go down that route. And partially because I always had that interest in teaching. But actually for me that, so the practical experience I think was really useful for coming back in anyway. So I think really endorsing that take the opportunity to get into practice and see what it's actually like.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Actually, picking up on that, the importance of going to practice, and also relating to what Beatrix was saying about participation. And she mentioned actually one of the currently buzzwords and one of the most important challenges that we're facing now, which is the implications of social distancing that COVID-19 is imposing on us. So, I mean, I would like to open a parenthesis here regarding participation in the current world we're living in. And this might also relate to what Sandro started to talk about, his passion regarding to participation. So I would like to maybe ask Sandro or Beatrix, who would like to reflect on this point. And this actually one of the things that we have asked to cover maybe in this webinar is the implications of the entire research and recruitment process in this very particular period of time. So maybe I shall divide my question, maybe first the participation aspects in terms of COVID, and then we go through more broadly the recruitment and the working setting. Beatrix or Sandro, please.
May I first give a short comment about this difference between practice and research in university and the interaction between the two. So I think it is important also to know that there are many different models in the universities in relation to the involvement into practice. If you go in the US, even in the best universities, they just study things and they have almost no idea about what happens really in practice. Then there are many other different models. For example, here in my university, we are really, so we do this kind of practice activity even within the university, particularly as I said before, when there is something, some kind of innovation that has to be done, in which the normal practice, for example, is not has not the opportunity of experimenting and explore, and so, for example, when we started to reflect upon strategic planning or to the strong involvement in participatory planning, that was something that we did within the university with much more time and opportunity, and this on the end benefited also the private practice. So I mean, this is something which is important. And for me, the model in which you just study, in which we have wonderful scholars, but sometimes it's too much detached from what is happening. And planning is a practical activity on the end. And so if we wanted to teach and to do research about this, we have to have an experience, we have to have a direct knowledge, as either Beatrix as Chris said. So this is just a comment. Going back to your question, so the COVID, how the COVID is influencing public participation, of course, is a strong constraint about that. Even if there is a strong push in developing a distance kind of online participation in something, which of course is not so equal in terms of the population that can be involved. And but of course, I think it is very important that in this period we try to be very to give a great attention to what is happening. We were discussing just before starting this the webinar with Ben about the fact that about our experience in teaching and in doing meetings during this phase, and for me, either in terms of teaching and in terms of doing meeting, even I mean webinars like the one that we are doing, we are learning a lot. For example, there are much more people that has the opportunity to listen or to participate, maybe not in such an interactive and in a effective way as if it was a personal meeting, but the information can circulate much more because a lot of people can attend this kind of meetings. So I mean, we have to be careful and give a lot of attention about what is happening in order then, after that, when it will be finished, hopefully, to be able to redesign the interaction between the personal relation and the online relation in a way that probably can become an improvement in our kind of activity, but even in the public participation in the planning activity.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sandro. Beatrix would like to add a few words.
Yes, it's a very difficult question to what COVID is doing with spatial planning and the planning professions. I'm currently thinking of two things. The one is from a more personal dimension. So I always benefited to be around with groups, to speak with groups, to network with groups, to have people physically in one room. And it's a different thing if I speak to all of you on the screen, or if you are here and we can have a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, walk around, look around, and if somebody explains, okay, what does it mean if I see this, what happens there? So these are things which we cannot do on the screen, on the virtual world we're living in at the moment. So there is also the problem which I see, it's as Sandro said, it's it's a good thing that information can circulate very easily, so that you can invite people to a webinar from all different places of the world, which is fantastic actually. The question, however, is are all these people who take part are prepared to translate what they hear in the webinar in the very local cultural context? So we have an audience with us for an hour, for 2 hours. I can tell you something about my research findings, what I found out about, I don't know, this or that. But the question is, what do the participants make out of this in their country? It's different if they live in Africa, or it's different if they live in Australia. Things have different meanings there. So, but they are left alone there to translate it, or how Patsy Healy also said, what happens if an idea from A lands in a place B? So we need to learn how to implement and translate them. So it's a bit the question, on the one hand, we have so much access to information, easy information, because you just click there and somebody is speaking to you. You even do not have to read a book and reflect yourself. You just sit there like a television and let people think for you. And then you take this information and say, oh, I'm very clever, I heard this and this, quote the person, webinar XY, and perfect, I can write my paper. But do I really understand all this? Do you really go back to the books? Big question mark, everybody is different. So there is a big, also the dark side, which I'm seeing in all this, because I love to stay together with people and do things with people together. And this helped me a lot in all my life so far. But the other thing is, it's also, we have to think in planning, I think, to make places outside differently, because with all the COVID and the social distancing, how can we make livable places or plan for livable places by keeping the distance? It doesn't mean that you just have to be at home, but you have to have a certain structure also outside for people, that they can go out and in a certain way interact without touching themselves, without shouting themselves, with having the masks, but also to see them. So we have to think about this as well. What do we do with the children? How do we bring them together with their grandparents and all these things? This is also a thing we as a planner have to task to think about in this time. How can we reorganize our places outside? So this, in my opinion, are two different things which we are confronted with in the current phase.
Yeah, thank you so much, Beatrix. So this is related to COVID and participation. I just would like to ask Ben, maybe you already answered to the question related to the postdoc. Would you like to speak? Please, the floor is yours, Ben.
Okay, thank you. I very much like how Trixie replied. This is the spirit of the times. You have to provide your own money, you have to find your own funding, you have to create your own job. That was very different when I was looking for a job. 40 years ago, universities looked very differently from how they are looking now. And I would think that Pinar's question, the answer really depends on which country we are talking about. There are countries where universities grow their professors. So you go to a student at the university, you become student assistant or assistant there, research assistant, and eventually you become a professor. And it's very difficult for outsiders to get into the system. If you pursue a career in such an environment, it is impossible to leave and to still expect that you will become a professor. You really have to stay at the universities. And then, of course, there are systems, countries where universities will hire virtually only outsiders, and you cannot grow into a position there. If you are in such a system, you need to find out what are your possibilities of finding a job outside of your university. And I would, if I can only speak for academic careers, I have no idea about what practitioners are doing. But if you are in a university where you know that you cannot become a professor there, draw a map. These days you can use GIS for doing that, and ArcGIS or something, and find out where are positions where the professor is at an age that by the time he or she is retiring, you are mature enough to compete for that position. And this is something that will help you focus on what you really are looking for. I did that when I was 25, when I was 30, and I had that map. It, of course, was not digital. And then the position I got finally in Dortmund never was on that map. So I think it's also important to accept opportunities when they open up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you so much, dear speakers, for all your for the presentations, for answering the questions. And as we are approaching, we still have 5 minutes to end this first webinar. I would like just to ask our speakers if anyone would like to add any other comment before wrapping up.
I wanted just to thank you for organizing this in such a good way. So thank you, Rozana. I think that it is very important to have these kind of opportunities to discuss. And I'm sure that, as Ben said, when we were young, we had not this kind of opportunity. We have had other opportunities maybe. But, and what Beatrix said, in a very clear way. So it is very, very important to go around and try to talk, because the only way we have to clarify ourselves is also to confront with other people and also the book that Beatrix edited with all this autobiographic history of the founding fathers of planning is very, very important, I think, because what we can learn is from probing our experience with the experience of the others. And so I think that for this I have to thank you, Rozana, because I think it's very important.
Thank you so much, Sandro. And like based on what you said and what Ben also said about the importance of this community building and the importance of sharing knowledge that we have the privilege to have, and AESOP is definitely through its Young Academics also network to provide the opportunity to get connected even in a virtual world. I guess, Ben, yeah. You wanted to say something?
I was just agreeing.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So yeah, definitely we feel privileged, and we definitely are very thankful as a Young Academics coordination team member or Young Academics bigger community for the AESOP to providing us this opportunity, and for your time as well that you are allocating to be sharing with us your experiences, your knowledge, and to reflect on your own journey, because at the end we can read your publications, but like I said, knowing the story behind every success is even more important than the story by itself. So speaking of which, I would like to say that this is the first webinar of the Young Academics series of webinars. So, and since we have already covered all the questions for today's webinar, I thank again our great speakers for their time and effort to share with us again their experience participants many tips and advices. Thank you all dear participants who shared their questions and for finding time also to visit us today in today's webinar. It was really nice to see friends, colleagues, and newcomers, especially that we didn't have the chance this year to meet live. So we are meeting virtually, and this webinar is providing us the opportunity to see some faces and some smiles, of course, over the screen, but nevertheless, it's also good. I will make sure to add either me or my colleague to add the Young Academics email in the chat if someone would like to reach out for any question. And before I say goodbye, in the last 2 minutes, I have 2 important information to highlight. First, like I said, this is the first webinar, and we'll be very happy to see you in our second webinar, which will take place in October, November. So please stay tuned through all our social media platforms to know more about the next coming webinar in terms of dates and themes. And so this is first. Secondly, I am very happy to announce today that the Young Academics will be hosting the AECOM team for a live discussion about the AECOM platform project. So the AECOM, the AESOP Knowledge Management and Sharing Platform, or acronym coined as AECOM, will be discussed in a private discussion with the hidden soldiers behind the AECOM project. How the young academics can benefit from this project, from this extremely promising opportunity of community building in a virtual world, will be at the heart of our live discussion with the AECOM team, which is something else other than webinars, but it will take place also, unfortunately, live. So if you missed any part of this webinar, or you couldn't, any colleague couldn't connect, you will receive the recording, and we hope to see you